Hello and good day. I'm here with Mr. Philippe Najean. He's a senior environmental engineer at the Department of Environmental Regulations of Western Australia. He's been in the field of odor assessments and regulation for decades, starting as an odor laboratory in France in the early 1990s. Today we will be talking about current odor regulation in Western Australia and future odor regulation. Mr. Najean, can you describe to us the odor regulations in Western Australia?
Yeah, so the current odor regulation in Western Australia is based on, there is two phases. The first one is the odor assessment, when you have a new site who wants to develop or an existing site who want to redevelop or to be modified. You have some assessments to be carried out. These assessments are based on various parts and various evidences related to odor modeling, related to empirical data, and related to separation distances now, where they have to perform and demonstrate that they will perform well. They will have a setback, enough setback in regarding to their activity, their size, and so on. In regards to now existing site with the license conditions, we have some license conditions that are more related to quite subjective approach still with unreasonable odors to be emitted, and sometimes some more outcome-based data with odor concentration for some specific equipment.
So it's a lot based on buffer zones. How challenging is that to actually apply these regulations, these limits, rather than really regulating odor concentrations?
Yeah. The odor concentration is still a bit an issue, I think, in the regulation. The point is the odor concentration has some large uncertainties. We have a little bit some regulations with odor concentration emitted from biofilters, for instance, but that's the only one. We don't have any limit on stack, for instance. The setback or the separation distances, and we prefer to use the separation distancing than buffer, because buffer is more a planning tool that will include the separation distances plus other planning considerations. So we are discussing more about separation distances. Separation distances is not based on modeling or stuff like that. It's really around experience, around case studies and specific case in Western Australia. I take the example of composting, for instance. We had few sites who closed down, or the license was revocated because the complaints was too important there, or the density of complaints. And basically based on the surface area, the throughput and so on, we know that what should be the setback for this type of plant. It's what we will implement, and we have implemented we have an environmental standard for separation distances that is now a guideline and a standard for the department. And basically, that will be the major tool, or the major tool to assess the risk of odor impacts, and much better than having some source assessment in odor unit and using modeling.
Okay. And how challenging is that for existing plants to adapt to these new measures, especially when they want to expand?
Yeah, so when they want to expand, so the definitive separation distances doesn't apply to the current one, because the management, because the size, because it's very difficult to assess all of that for a current plant. So the license on this plant is still maybe an old format license and old conditions. Okay. Now, if this existing plant wants to redevelop, or want to be modified, or want to increase this throughput by 30%, or want to build a new, or have a new ponds, or etc., it will go through what we call a works approval. So it means that they will have an application to increase the throughput. Increasing the throughput will have some impact on various sources where the emissions can increase and etc. So they will have to provide an application with the application some document that will support the fact that they will increase. What will be the level of increasing? But in this case, they will fall under the regulation of the environmental standard for the separation distances. I mean, this composting plant, for instance, will have to demonstrate with this new throughput that they will be able just to have the minimum setback or separation distances they have. Now, because it's an existing one, you may have some sensitive receptors close by. There's several options in this case. Either, and we may say, no, the risk is too high, you can't do that as it is, just increasing without anything else. You have to offset your increase, and you have to offset your increase of emissions, okay, by some measures of mitigations. So either they provide some mitigations where we will have said that, okay, that's fine and should be okay with this one, okay, in this case you can expand. Or we'll say, no, it's not. Now it would be the decision of the proponent to say, okay, I don't expand, or I want really to expand, but I don't have the approval to expand here, and I find a new site just to develop my activity.
And the measures, the mitigation measures these industry could apply, keeping that same distance, they have to do assessments to that. What type of assessments do you want them to do?
So it's where we also wanted to have an approach with what we are calling the OMMP, the Odor Management and Monitoring Plan, because when they will apply for these expansions, for instance, they will have to provide an Odor Management and Monitoring Plan where they would have reviewed all the concerning and all the issues and what are the major sources of operation of activities where they may have some large emissions or larger emissions than before. With this one, what they will do and what they will, how they will monitor this one. Then, when they monitor this one, they know that they have a certain range within within this one. They should work to avoid emissions. Then they will have some corrective actions if something goes wrong. So it means they have all this protocol to go through, and that will help them also just to do to have a better management. Now, to answer your questions, within this odor management plan or odor management and monitoring plan, what they will do also is they will be able just to propose to have some odor source assessment. So odor concentration measurements at various sources, plus odor field assessment. And basically, we apply the VDI 3940 Part 2 with the intensity measurements in Western Australia. And they will do that before the expansion. And they will use that as a benchmark. And once, assuming that we agree that they are okay to expand with limited risk, okay, they will expand. And we'll give them maybe 1, 2, 3 months to ramp up at the nominal conditions. And when there are nominal conditions, we will ask them just to reproduce exactly the same strategy of sampling and measurements at the source, and to reproduce also under quite similar met conditions and process conditions, okay, to do some other field surveys. Now, if in the other field surveys, for instance, they are with, I don't know, a radius of 300 meters before the expansion, they have an impact to up to 300 meters, okay, under some specific met conditions. If they redo this one after the expansion with quite similar met conditions, and they find that now the radius of impacts is now maybe 600 or 800 meters, and basically all the odors comes from their plant, it means in this case they should have something in the OMMP, and as a regulator will check that telling, oh, that's not good. I increase by a fold of 2 or 3 times my separation distance, and it comes from me. I am responsible for that. I have to do something. So they have to put some mitigations in place. And if they cannot put mitigation in place, we can, as a regulator, just to say, guys, you're 30% of throughput, okay? We don't want that anymore. You have to come back to the normal throughput. Okay, that will be basically the condition they have. So it's the onus is on the proponent to take the decision of I can do something and I can reduce that, or no, I can't do anything. I'm really without any solution. And in this case, I just set back to and I come back to my normal production.
Oh, that's pretty good. Now, you started in working in an odor laboratory in early 1990s. What are the changes that you've observed in odor assessment throughout your career and internationally?
Yeah, so to be correct, it's more at the end of the 90s, early 2000s when I started working in Odors. I was working before, but not directly in the Odor area. What has changed? There is some change within what happened in France maybe 8 or 9 years ago before I left to go to Australia, and what happened now in Australia and what happens in Europe and etc. What we were, where I was at the time, and with less knowledge than now, we were doing some measurements. We were doing a lot of odor concentration measurements, a lot of modelings. In France, we had the modelings with the 98th percentile, for instance. We set up some conditions in some license where they had for rendering plants, for instance, doing some modeling also, doing some assessment and modeling after, and just to as a compliance parameters. It's something that I don't know if they're still doing that in Europe. What I found, at least in France, is at the stack, they don't ask to do some monitoring and modeling after, but they do a pre-modeling. And basically the pre-modeling, they calculate back, they have a back calculation of the odor concentration at the stack depending on the throughput and the height of the stack, and that give them the maximum odor concentration. So basically, they don't have to do the modeling anymore because they did that previously. They do some odor concentration measurements, and if this odor concentration measurement is above what they have measured before and modeled, means they have some risk to have some higher level of impact than before. So they are still doing that. In Western Australia, we don't use the modeling as a compliance tool at all for an existing plant. Okay, so we have some assessment in odor concentration sometimes, but now we are working more and more with odor intensity in Western Australia because, as it has been said during this several presentations here, you have, when you are working on about large plants, and even wastewater treatment plant, refinery, brickworks, some large plants like that, it's very difficult just to be sure you assess all the sources. Plus, you have a large percentage of fugitive sources that you will never catch. So it means in this case, if you just do some source assessment, you will miss maybe 50% or 60% or 50% at least of all the sources. So doing a modeling on that is not representative. We don't expect to get something. Prefer just to have some field survey. So it's why within the OMMP, one more time, if they perform some other field survey before and they perform that after, it's much more relevant as a tool and as a result for us than a modeling by itself. So that's where we try to move toward that and insist more and more on a better management. Because when I arrived in Australia 8 years ago, it's what I presented this morning. It was really appalling. It's the management at the plant was very limited. And most of the contentious sites I worked on were related to a poor management. Not a poor technology, but really a poor management. So I think now we move towards monitoring, to let's think a little bit more about our process, what sort of better management I can have to limit as much as I can my emissions. And when you reach this level of, I am at the level of the maximum limitations I can have, and you still have some large emissions, that's where you consider that, I can't do more. So we need to find some really high contingencies to know what to do. But if you do that by experience, what I found in Australia, you will solve more than 90% of the case. Because going to the level of the minimum emissions will be enough just to release any concern and just to not have any more concerns in regard to impacts and potential annoyance and complaints after.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.